Hi there, Randi here, and welcome to another podcast where I will ponder upon some of the issues that we are having right now in our reality field. This podcast is going to focus on the crisscrossing on the sky, which I woke up to this morning, and I put footage in this video so you can see how it looked. Of course, this has happened many times before. The reason why I noticed it significantly was because it was different than what it normally was or has been, at least for the last 1.5 months, where the clouds have been very heavy, very low hanging. July has in Denmark been the most wet month for a very, very long time. And we have had hailstorms in northern Italy while having severe heat in the south of Italy and other unusual weather phenomenon in the northern hemisphere. So with that, we also kind of look into, weather modification, right? This is the topic I want to touch ground with here today in this podcast. And where do I want to go with this? First and foremost, I made one to begin with earlier when I was out there, and there was a little bit too much huffing and puffing to my taste because I was walking around out in the weather where these crisscrossing were right above me. And that, of course, influenced my thought processes as well as at the time. Early this morning, we had a lot of in-flights of airplanes, so they were also present on the sky, which was interesting because not only did we have the crisscrossing on the sky, which most calls contrails, right? Even though they behave in odd ways, they are not like the contrails we remember, those of us who are of the older generation, the ones we remember as kids. Absolutely not. They linger on the sky, they spread out and turn into a dimming effect on the sky, which of course, for those of us who have eyes to see with, we kind of already are onto, there's definitely going on some kind of program that is a type of weather modification, whether it is known by science or private contractors or some of the future humanities operating inside our reality field. So the conundrum for us and the question for us to ask that are looking at the sky, some of us remember back to the 2000s where we had information on YouTube on the topic, and it was called a specific word which I'm deliberately not using. I don't really agree with it, but it lingered on and dimmed the conversation, pun intended, back in the 2000s. It was also brought to certain hearings where it was talked about. There were made different types of investigation of the soil and water samples. There has been documentaries and other stuff you can find on YouTube on that one. It's of older material, and it might not be possible to find anymore because it's literally buried in all of the newer material. If you look up weather modification, solar radiation management, or the specific word that I'm not using here, but for those of you who are into the mix of what's going on, you will know the word exactly what it is, and you will look it up. I suggest you do that, and I suggest you take a little bit of time to look into these programs that we know have played out. There was weather modification or cloud seeding happening, I think it was in the Olympics in China in the early 1990s or the 2000s, can't remember, that was there. I don't know if it's there anymore. I'm not going to use a lot of time finding that on YouTube. I suggest you do that research yourself. There was also cloud seeding already as part of early programs in the States, dating all the way back to, I think it's as far back as 1949, perhaps later. There were attempts to do that already during the Vietnam War, as well, also performed by the US government or military projects that we can say to a more or lesser degree were covert and not really out in the open, but has been released later on, that created a heavy downpour as part of what we could call not an invasion strategy, but a kind of a strategy to try and make it more difficult for the Vietnamese troops to be on land, as in creating a very muddy conditions which would slow them down. That should also be to be found out there. I can't remember what that project is called. Either way, we are having things that are out there, and I found a selection of YouTube videos from the news as well as some kind of scientific discussion. And for some scientists, it's like, does this really exist, and contemplate upon whether or not it will be a solution for the climate changes. And I am not the one that says, oh yeah, let's go pro SRM. And I'm here to talk about solar radiation management, as it was called in the old days, where you dimmed the atmosphere and by that created what we could call a reflection carpet or blanket on the sky that would bounce back the solar rays so that they would not heat up inside the ionosphere. And for me, when we're already talking about we are having issues with the greenhouse effect, which some say is or is not, whether or not that is or is not, the whole point of the green gases are that they also create a carpet around our planet in the ionosphere that prevents the heat from the planet to be expelled or pushed into space. We are also having a very active solar cycle 25, which you will see science agree on, that is very active. Right now, it's still within the range of what they perceive as be quote unquote normal compared to the numbers they have going back to when they began to register it. So we don't have numbers before that, and by that it's kind of a limited prognosis or a limited what you call scale that can be made from that. The graph is not complete because it were they began to observe it and to register it pretty late. I think it's 200 years ago or something, or perhaps even only 100 years ago. So the data doesn't go far back. And with that, with the enormous amount of CMEs or solar bursts that are throwing out solar flares and high kinetically charged energy ringing in our solar system, even though that science says, oh, the CME was on the backside of the sun, and by that it's not oriented towards Earth, so it does not hit our ionosphere or the magnetic field, and by that there are not this kind of geomagnetic what we call eruption or disturbance, but and by that not aurora or sorry, I was going to, what I was going to say there, which is interesting because it is a little bit in the same way. Either way, there's not going to be the signs in the sky that we have been hit by an SME. But the matter of the fact is, that's my opinion, we are having only the understanding around 4% of what our solar system is made of within the electromagnetic spectrum. So we don't really understand the dynamics that are within dark matter and dark energy or the holographic network that are also part of the shields of the sun that are now changing their configuration into what I call a density 1 sun that first will become very hot, as we're seeing, and it will continue. A solar cycle 26 will probably be even hotter, and 27, and then science will begin to understand, okay, we don't have the normal fluctuations here, it's just going upwards and upwards. Similarly, as they have also discovered that space is expanding not within the constant of 1 as they thought, but is actually exponentially rising up to a quicker expansion that they thought of, also because of the burst of the sun and the high amount of energy that is now being pushed into the microwave background, and by that are fueling it to hold more potent types of energy. We could call it a neutrino blanket that are being added to the gamma ray spectrum. And this is not what science know of. This is Randi Green here telling you a little bit of what she gets of information from the reality field information network that some of us can access and have information from. Whether or not it's legit or not, this is what I'm getting. So that means that everything is speeding up, including the magnetic field and how it is functioning, because it's now being loaded up with what we could call higher forms of solar radiation that will speed up the way that the magnetic field works. And that is also part of the heating up of the ionosphere. Others will say, oh, it's of course the HARP and other similar ionospheric type of devices that are operating in the ionosphere, which many speculated on again in the 90s and 2000s, whether that were part of the weather modification technology as well, which it might be or might not be. But it's definitely affecting the ionosphere, that we do know for a certainty. We also know that back in, when was it? Some of the early atmospheric nuclear blast project, Argus, I think it was called that, going with the Greek god, or the Hercules, or the semi-god Hercules. He was on the 12 labors, and one of them was to get the golden skin from a specific goat, and I think it's called Argus, referring to that project. Again, look it up. I might be wrong. I might remember it in a slightly different way, which leads me to the next step of our little investigation here. When we talk about the different challenges and changes that are happening around us, we interpret within the spectrum of knowledge that we have within our frames of references. Science does the same. They call it paradigms. They also call it frames of references. What we have studied is what we will understand reality within. That's the spectrum we operate within. So the more we know, the more different types of tiers of information, different tiles we can put together, and by that create a more complex pattern of understanding. The lesser we know, the more simplified our interpretation will be. It will also be highly fueled by our emotional comfort zone and what we want to acknowledge and what we don't want to acknowledge, which is why there are still people out there that are in complete denial of the crisscrossing on the sky, because it doesn't match their frames of references. They have not studied beyond that. They are still looking at it as contrails, and then they will say, well, it's probably because the atmosphere is now so polluted that whatever is pumped out of the planes is now lingering on, like engine exhaustion, as we also see it with cars on inside this lower level, a lower spectrum of the ionosphere, which is called the atmosphere. Sorry about that. The atmosphere where we breathe and live and exist under the effects of the Schumann resonance, which is the lower levels of the atmosphere around our planet. So we have different levels of the ionosphere that goes from where we can exist in the extreme low frequency spectrum that are in correlation with the Schumann resonance that affect the weather. And that means that humans and the weather via the Schumann resonance, this is a claim. Others have talked about that as well. I remember reading books in the 90s about this. Can't remember the scientist. I can't remember who made it because it's so long ago. These books probably doesn't exist anymore. But I studied it back then, including the 2000s, where I looked into these kind of things. And when I say I studied back then it was in the 2000s, but the books was from the 80s and the 90s. Some of these a little bit more hippie approaches to weather systems and how they were interconnected to the Schumann resonance, and how our cellular structure, which also works on electromagnetic energy, were then intertwined with the Schumann resonance. And by that, who and what we were interacting with the Schumann resonance, which also is interacting or creating what we understand as some of the foundation for the weather patterns, the ionization of the atmosphere that creates clouds, that creates water droplets, and other similar phenomenon up in the sky. And that's why I brought a little bit of science video below as well, where you can listen to some other ideas of how precipitation is actually put in motion as far as science understands it. So it's a little bit difficult still to understand how can ionization of the sky or the ionosphere create electrochemical processes that produces water. And science can do that in the lab, so we know how it works, we just don't know why. So this is again to understand, yes, we can explain how it works, we just don't know why it works that way. So that's the big conundrum science haven't solved yet. They have a lot of explanations of how it works, but not the whys. And that's where they typically go and say, well, that's the existential question, is it? Without going into intelligent design and other lesser scientific understandings of what is there and what is going on there. We can't, as Aristotle said, well, it all comes down to the primal mover or the creator of the universe, right? We can't go there. We need to go beyond. So the only other way we can go, and that's the one I am operating from within, also due to personal encounters and information I get from within in telepathic contact and information load ups, which I am creating a new kind of understanding about in some of my work that I'm doing right now, trying to put it together into thought forms that will create a system of thought from where we will get a language to talk about these things, combining it with the known sciences as well as the parasciences, as well as what we could call higher order psychic energetic, whether we call it remote viewing or we call it telepathic contact, or we call it using the higher order senses to dive into the extra energetic layers that are around our planet and connected to our reality field. So I'm working to the best of my abilities to create a language for some of these newer perceptions that those of us who have activated our extrasensory perception are in, I won't say control because we don't really control it yet, but we're definitely working to implement it as part of our lower senses so that they become, we both have the lower order senses and the higher order senses. And I'm working on that on the whole Academy website as well, the whole approach to ESP. So I'm working on finding language for this so we can begin to have a communication that is not entirely within the UFO community or within what we call the old spiritual teaching system. So we are beginning to move into a different type of understanding of reality, where we have now got technology that are catching up with many of what we would call the innovative science fiction ideas that were given to humanity in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and what have you. And we are now moving into actually seeing it exemplified from not only seeing it as ideas, but now coming to the place or the state where it can become a pattern of change and be implemented as scientific groundbreaking ideas where science then begin to operate with new paradigms, which is what the future humanities are part of their work. That's what they're doing here, and that's part of the nodal points and access point across what we understand as time, but there is no linear time, but we could call the loops of time that can both be local and non-local, but can also be outside of what we understand as space-time. And that's, how is that possible? Well, you breach through the quantum field and go into the artificial fourth dimension. Then you're outside our perception of reality. Then you're outside the 4% or 5% of what science know of electromagnetic energy. And you go into what I for now has called density energies, but we can also call them holographic energetic units, from where a different type of reality in different realms can be generated and engineered. And that's the next step of the sciences that we need to look into. And if we work with that idea that we have an artificial fourth dimension connected to our reality field as we know of it, and that ties into the higher levels of energy that are connected to the sun, that the sun has an artificial fourth dimensional type of shield to it that are now breaking down, and we are having old type of technologies that were part of the colonizing races that got here some 15,000 years ago that is also positioned in the fourth dimension. Then we begin to understand, okay, how does reality dynamics actually work when we incorporate holographic energetic units and an artificial fourth dimension that's not time, but actually a different type of energy that works within a different set of laws and what we call physics that allows for manifestation and demanifestation. They call it formation and deformation of physicality and non-physicality using the local and non-local principles of quantum dynamics, from where they can manifest and demanifest using different forms of triangulation between the artificial fourth dimension, holographic energetic unit, what we call accretion, from where physical matter can be generated. Then we also begin to understand virtual particles and how they can pop in and out of the quantum field. If we then say, well, there is a reality behind the quantum field, and that the quantum field is not the foundation of reality, but actually it's just a barrier between this reality under the electromagnetic energies and the true realities that extends beyond that. And that's where we are heading. If we begin to play with that, then it's completely simple how we can go in and out of space-time, not time travel as a linear, non-reversible time that follows the speed of light, but we both then begin to understand the speed of light can become flexible, that time is not an arrow that goes in a three-dimensional space in one direction, but actually can go back and forward using the entanglement principles, and the entanglement principles can go into different forms of quantum wave patterns, from where time can go backwards and forwards between these two points of energy that are interconnected within what we could call symmetry, as far as we know how the subparticles are built up with a plus and a minus, or a dipolar type of configuration. But if we go in and say there's an artificial fourth dimension and a real fourth dimension as well that are tied to our solar system, well, then suddenly it's not just plus and minus that we are dealing with in an electromagnetic spectrum, a pull and a radiation, or a contraction and an expansion. We are then also talking about, well, there are different dynamics of how these things can operate. It's not just we have the spin of the subparticles that are positioning themselves in specific angular momentum within the quantum fields, but we are actually having something that can go inside of this and change the properties of it completely, from one type of energy into another type of energy, from where it can come into more crystalline formation, which we understand as electromagnetic energy that manifests into this reality as physical matter, but it can also become deformation and go into holographic properties, from where it does have what we call laws that governs this, but it's not the laws of physics as we know of it. And that's some of the sciences that we are still to understand. And that is where I want to push this with what's going on the sky. Some of it is weather modification. There is a change in the crisscrossing on the sky. There is the one that creates global dimming or local. People that think that they can modify weather over their country, thinking that the clouds are only local, they will discover that it doesn't work that way. We have already got proof of that. When you have a volcanic eruption somewhere on the planet, the dust will be led via the weather system to other places on the planet. Similarly, as when we have dust from Sahara, that will be lifted up into the ionosphere, the atmosphere, and that will be transported to other places on the planet, from the south to the north, due to the different currents that are around our planet, also called the magnetic field, that are governing that, including the Schumann resonance. So we can't just say, well, we create clouds here in this local environment and it does not affect the rest of the planet. But again, we are having countries that think that just because they have jurisdictional rights on the land, they also own the air space, so that they kind of say, this is above our country, so this is our airspace. We have the right of the heavens there, so they control the heavens and the earth where they reside. And we are in for quite some lesson when we are going further down the line, or inside what we understand as linear time, into the future, where we discover that we cannot have this segregation dynamics going on. We need to learn to collaborate if we're going to fix this as a joint group, and not just within different kind of institutions that are talking together, which they haven't learned yet. We know that from the UN and other similar organizations. We need really conversation where we really begin to work together and understand we're living as part of the same system. It's not there are locality, but most of the time, all of these localities, they join together as a network into the global environment that we call our planet. With this one, I want to open up for comments below this podcast or this little video. I would like a discussion to take form, and the discussion or sharing of opinion. I would like you to, I would like you to go in and look at some of the material I have found for you below the video. I will set link to my project site on the future humanities and the power sciences, as well as link to spaceweather.com, where you can get a little bit of insight in some of the what's going on in what we call the space weather, as well as to what I've talked about here on the Hall Academy website with a whole approach to ESP. What I would like in the comments is, a lot of people put comments in there where they just throw out their opinion on whatever they feel in the moment that they want to share there. And of course, I can't tell people not to do that. I wish they wouldn't, but this is how things work. For the rest of you that are willing to study a little bit, do some research. The idea is here that we create a forum where we actually can begin to put some insights beneath this video. I would like this YouTube series, Surviving the Future, to also be where we can really use the idea of commenting below a video, where we can create a discussion, where we, as we used to do on Instagram and on Facebook in the old days, would have open discussions about, okay, what is this? What is this phenomenon? Look at the sky. What is your opinion on that one? How do you remember it was? I know all of us that are listening to this podcast or looking into this video, you will say, yeah, we're kind of on the same page here. We kind of understand. But we're still just at the observance level. We haven't got really any answers. I can say, well, I can definitely find answers that ties into my frames of references with ETs and artificial fourth dimension and alien technology. And that is quite clear to me. But I also know it's not a perfect match, because at other times it's the future humanities that are tampering with our ionosphere, sorry about that. And at other times we are having visitors that are coming from other systems that are bleeding through parallel dimensions and are also operating. Sometimes they create this cloud cover because they have extractions of old crafts that they need to pull out. And in that, they are overheating the ionosphere. They are pumping it up with different forms of electromagnetic energy to create the triangulation that allows them to leave this reality and into the artificial fourth. So there's many different angles to this. It's not a one-fit-all solution or one-fit-all explanation to what's going on. And that is what I suggest you begin to observe and perhaps notice or take notes of, the different types of crisscrossing that's on the sky. When you discover one type of crisscrossing, what will you then, if you sit in contemplation and in inner silent work of thinking about what you just saw today, what will be the answer? Ask the question, what type of technology is now being used today? And see what you come up with answers. Try to dig in from the angle of science. It's not necessarily something you find on the internet, but actually something that you can find within. Answers you can get from within, not just from what you have studied so far, where your brain just concoct a kind of a pattern of what you already know, but try to go deeper than that. Try to reach in and say, can you go beyond your reality perception as it is what you have been taught so far, Go into the double awareness and use your high order senses to understand what it is. But at the same time, also be observant of, is this distortion? Is this just astral content? Is this some kind of interception that comes in and gives me ideas that are not in alignment with what I actually see? And that's why I'm not coming out there and saying, oh, the whatever's going on in the sky is this and that, whatever, because I'm still also learning to discern, is this interception? Is this inserted into my mind? So I think I have found the solution, but the matter of the fact is I'm just tapping into another reality program where I'm being fed with information that is not really what's going on, but is a holographic overlay, another level of cloaking that in different ways are preventing me from actually seeing what is truly going on. Because if I really understood what was going on, well, then the clarity of mind would allow me to really tap into some of the levels of reality that I know there are factions on different levels, whether it's parallel or extraterrestrial or future humanities, that really is not interested in letting us get these solutions yet. They are working to get us there, but they're not interested in us really getting there right now, because there's still a lot of experimentation going on from all of these different factions, and they haven't found the solutions yet for some of the issues we have. And the question is, why is that? Because the power of the collective fields of humanity that joins together and begin to think in sync and without interference, but really begin to align their minds within the correct type of sciences, then that combination of the psychic energetic community we would create and the ability to really see what's going on would actually allow us to work on the same levels they are working on. And then we would have a chair, we would have a seat, we would have an opinion that would actually matter. We would become part of the governance of our reality field. And that is the game that they are trying to prevent us from accessing and getting on top on, as in getting to the position where we actually could have an energetic effect on not only reality, but also within the different councils, as well as within the different decision-making systems, let us call it that currently are running the show on our planet. So with that little podcast here, I will end this little level of speculation, and please feel free to comment below, but bear in mind, the idea is here to create a debate. The idea is here to share knowledge. The idea is here to share knowledge that will lead to the highest good of the many, that will lead to insights for others that have lots to learn, so that the comments will be educational. Think about that. What you are writing, will it be educational, or will it just be a projection of your emotionality that you want to put out there because you're a little bit discontent with reality as it is? And that is, of course, also part of it. But these emotional outbursts are not really helping anyone other than just stating your state of mind and then creating a lot of negative energy and a lot of negative emotionality around it, which I have as well. But it does not lead us to the debate where we, with clear-headed, level-headed discussions or debates, can come up with some kind of joint solutions on this. So this is where I am challenging you to begin to think in parascientific manner, learning to understand how observation works, how your mind works, how frames of references are creating the narrative around your reality and how you perceive reality, and how if you by changing that narrative and your insights and working with information in a different manner, might actually come up with different solutions and different aspects of reality and interpretation of what reality is. And by that are expanding your perception field, not just to be within your comfort zone of your personality matrix, but actually go beyond and say, okay, I got who I am and who I think I am. Others are what they think they are, and they're allowed to do so. And then there's you and reality. How do you interact with reality? How do you correspond with reality and what you know? And how are you part of the joint field of humanity that are in denial or semi-denial or within old concepts and paradigms? how in your way of processing information are you assisting reality to progress into a higher level clarity, and how much are you adding to the distortion fields, and by that the Schumann resonance, and by that actually add to the erratic weather, which we have also seen examples of, that when there are these surges of a lot of collective energy in a specific manner, it has a tendency to also affect the weather. So let's think a little bit about that. Not that we as single people can affect the locality, unless of course you've got a very strong energy system, then of course you can. But I would say we should perhaps more look into how we as a joint group, as a joint race, a planetary race, are affecting not only by our actions, but what we produce as materialistic energy, but also, of course, as we know, of gaseous energies, as residual energies of whatever we are utilizing on the planet, of technology and cars and what have you. But at the same level, also think about how our three lower fields energetically are affecting the magnetic field as well. That's the bio level. It is affecting the Schumann resonance. That's our emotional level. And it is affecting the upper levels of our ionosphere, very difficult, that is connected to your mental field. So this is, if you begin to work with that understanding of reality as intertwined with your energy system, then we have a lot of work to do, because then we really begin to understand, yes, we need to work with our psyche as energy. We need to work with our biofield as energy that are connected to the planetary system. That means what we eat and how we treat our physicality plays in. The way we process emotions plays in. The way we process thoughts plays in. And that is part of the transition sciences that I have done my very best to explain some of the expanded version of our holographic energetic architecture. So with that said for today, until next time, take care and enjoy your research and see what you come up with in contemplation and what kind of ideas that you can come up with. And if you really, for me, the best way to ask questions is not to get answers, but to initiate processes of progression from where we can continuously learn and ask new questions, and with that come up with ideas of how can we do this, not necessarily solutions, but processes of progression. We're here to develop what we are as a species, as a race, not to find solutions that will only last as long as the energetic settings are as they are now, but learn to understand that reality change, we change, our environment change, everything changes, and thereby sciences and whatever operating frames of references we have, whatever narratives we create, they must change too. We can't cling on to perceptions of reality that suits our comfort zone and our personality matrix. We must progress what we are so that we can join the collective fields and progress these so that we can follow with the changes of our solar system. Thank you.